Thanks a lot, Mark. That deserves a big applause. You already got it without asking for it. I want to ask you, why don't we have in Europe more such success stories from EU-funded innovation? Do you have an idea what are the obstacles?
Have you ever seen the application form?
I can tell you, yes, I saw them. And you touch a critical and crucial point. I see them since 15 years, and every commissioner for research tells us, and scientists, we will come up with simplifying process and proposals. And now I have hope after 15 years that it will happen. We just had last week a briefing about the Horizon 2020, though the new research framework program, the 8th in numbers, but now we call it Horizon 2020. And the promises are there, and I hope that it will deliver and that the procedures will be easier. Margaret, I want to come as around us now. I want to ask you, you have good examples how projects can help in the developing countries to come through.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to share with you a few examples of innovation that really revolutionized the practice of care, particularly in developing countries. Now, let me begin with one of the perhaps most successful stories in recent times. This is also to illustrate the power of collaboration by the international community. And that's why, Andrew, you talk about the IMI. Here, I give you an example to illustrate the importance of PPP, public-private partnership. Now, in December last year, I was in Burkina Faso to launch a meningitis conjugate vaccine for 25 countries that are called, in sub-Saharan Africa, they are called the notorious meningitis belt. Every year, many children would be infected with meningitis. Now, meningitis is perhaps not the biggest killer in these countries, but it is the most feared because the disease spread very quickly and it can be fatal very quickly. And what is even more devastating, children that survive will suffer permanent disability, either mental disability or hearing loss. So what WHO did was, together with PATH, with the support of the core funding by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and with technology transfer from one country in Europe, as well as from the US FDA, transferred the technology to Serum Institute in India to make a vaccine, a new vaccine, at the cost of 50 cents per dose, and the pretty much lowest price you can get. And of course, Canada was instrumental in helping Serum Institute to get the regulatory approval. The World Health Organization did the pre-qualification. What does that mean? That means we stand behind the quality, safety, and efficacy. And that is the first innovation in many, many years, first launch in Africa. And this is possible because of the power of collaboration between rich and developing countries. And of course, I must also give credit to the African scientists who helped to do the clinical trial. So we launched the vaccine. We are seeing extremely good results. This kind of innovation is really changing the life of children and also helping countries in terms of cost avoidance. Can you imagine the cost to society of the disability of these children that they need to continue to take care of? So this is one example. Now, I can think of another example. For those of us who work in maternal and child health, I spent many years in this area. We know that the most frequent cause of women dying from, giving birth is postpartum or post-delivery hemorrhage or obstructed labor. Now, the Canadian Challenges Initiative, supported by Norway, USAID, and other countries, really stimulate many scientists to come up with innovations. One such innovation is oxytocin. Oxytocin is important to stop bleeding. And the trouble with oxytocin, being used in very remote villages, they need electricity. They need refrigeration, which they don't have. So the innovation is, very soon we would be having inhalable oxytocin. So in effect, this innovation means you transfer the life-saving capacity from cities, from big centers, to the most remote areas. Another important intervention that is being developed by WHO scientists, which is called the ODON device. This is a device to assist women in obstructed labor. That is also one of the biggest killer. Why women die? Because for whatever reasons, the baby is too big for the birth canal. And it is a damage to mother and children. What we do is, we have a device now in clinical trial. If this is approved, it is perhaps the first innovation in decades, if not in centuries. For those of you who are obstetricians, you understand the vacuum for extraction of babies was developed decades ago, and forceps to assist obstructed delivery was invented centuries ago. So these are the kind of innovation spurred by grand challenges of Canada. And I'm happy that the EU, I want to congratulate you and commend you for launching the Innovation Union as one of the 7 flagship initiatives that will spur innovations from Europe and beyond. And WHO is happy to partner with you in terms of defining the research agenda and also bringing products to the market and also for its dissemination. Now, I need to end on one note by making this point. We don't have enough investment in discovery and development. The investment in delivery, innovation for delivery, is even worse. The power of innovation will not be realized without timely diffusion and scaling up in developing countries. Why does it take 10 to 20 years for developing countries to enjoy innovation and get the benefit to improve the life of people and the quality of life? You talk about aging of the population. It's good to have a long life, longer expectancy. But if your quality of life is miserable, this is something we need to think about. What can innovation offer in terms of going forward? And Andrew, I'm sure, you from GSK, I have to say GSK is perhaps one of the very enlightened companies. I'm biased, you can say that, and that is true. Because we work very well with your company in bringing innovation to the poorest of the poor people. A group of people, about 2 billion of people in this world, have no access to medicines that are very cheap. And they suffer from a big group of disease called neglected tropical diseases. And these are the kind of innovations. We have innovative partnership to bring medicines to the poorest. And our collaboration with the pharma industry in the last 5 years, we have managed to reach close to 1 billion people who suffer from these diseases. So I think, it is important to talk about innovation, discovery, development, and delivery. But innovation in partnership is extremely important. You refer to the IMI in terms of partnership with the academic, with governments, and also with the industry. Don't forget the picture, okay? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Margaret. I think you touched crucial points, and I want to ask Andrew, what is the focus of GSK and of EFPRIA delivering results for the less developing country? The figures we just learned from Margaret was that health expenditure in the less developing countries is $1 per person a year, and 1,000 in the developed country. Though there is 7,000. Thanks for that. 7,000. So it's an enormous gap. what can pharmaceutical industry contribute? Or do you, first of all, invest on the big markets in the development region?
Well, I think, first of all, the industry can and has done a very great deal for the developing and particularly the least developed world, where the needs are most acute. 2/3 of the HIV cases in the world are in the poorest 50 countries of the world. Almost all, by definition, of the neglected tropical disease burden falls into the poorest countries of the world. And most of that sits in the continent of Africa. So that really is the focus point of where, if we're going to solve anything, we have to solve it for many of the countries in Africa. There are many beyond that, but Africa represents by far the greatest share of the challenge in terms of the exposure of disease combined with lack of income. And the two clearly are not independent of each other. If you look at what GSK particularly has focused on, what we've tried to do is, more than anything, innovate our business model. So the industry has historically been rightly criticized for defending a singular approach to its business model across the world, one that worked very well in the developed markets of the world, didn't work so well for the least developed markets of the world. And if you look at what GSK has done over the last several years, we've led the way in terms of, for example, opening up intellectual property access to neglected tropical disease, where we publish all of our know-how and our intellectual property in that field. We've led the way in terms of donation programs. We now donate around 1 billion treatments a year for worm-based disease, and we've made a commitment that we will continue to donate that quantity of product until those diseases are eradicated in all children of school age, which is a very substantial, obviously, long-term commitment in collaboration with WHO. We've also made it very clear that where we have medicines which are new medicines, that we will price cap those medicines so that in the least developed countries of the world, we will not charge more than 25% of the price that's charged in Europe. And what we've also made clear is any profits we make in those countries, which by definition is going to be very small amounts because of what I've just said, but any profits we'll make, 20% of that profit will be reinvested into healthcare infrastructure to improve delivery. So one of the things we run into constantly is, even when we donate medicines, they never leave the airfield because there is no distribution capability. Sometimes they don't even leave the airplane because they just bring them straight back to Europe and sell them on the black market somewhere. So it was a great challenge for us to try and do what we can to help that distribution capability, which is why we've committed to reinvest 20% of any profits we have into the local healthcare infrastructure. Those are all the types of initiatives we can take. What does that mean? We've seen over the last decade a massive increase in the availability of HIV treatments to people in Africa. We've seen a huge increase in vaccine availability. We've seen a huge increase in neglected tropical disease drug availability. And I'm delighted to say a very significant increase in the number of companies who are also helping to contribute towards solving NTD problems. That's really where we can go. Now, of course, we also invest in the West. And there is an absolutely, you can call it implicit or explicit, but there is a clear subsidization effect from the prices and the returns that companies make in the richer countries of the West to what companies are able to do for the poorest countries in the world. And there is a gradient, no question about it. And there are lots of people in the world who don't like to acknowledge that. And there are lots of people in the world who don't think that's right. But it is the way it works. And what it allows is for companies to be able to go much further in the least well-off parts of the world to deliver better healthcare options, speed up the availability of modern treatments more quickly, and release resources to help build a healthcare infrastructure. And that's pretty much the approach that we take.
We have to take into account that we are living in a divided world. 2/3 of those 7 billion human beings on this global are starving from hunger every day. And Margaret just mentioned it. We have to put credit to the African scientists. So, Andrew, what is the contribution of the European pharmaceutical industry, which is a global player, to the cooperation in innovation terms on the African continent, for example, with researchers on the field?
Right. Well, in many areas, of course. So a lot of the medicines that we're talking about came from companies like GSK. First of all, if you look at the most recent...
Which is only a quarter of an hour away.
If you look at the most recent examples, and I'll just again focus on GSK for a second, there's probably two areas which I would really draw your attention to. One is in the development of a malaria vaccine. 10 years ago, people thought we and the scientists who worked for us were crazy to believe that you could develop a vaccine against malaria. It's impossible to vaccinate against a parasitic-borne disease. You'll have seen data which was published just a few weeks ago to show that, in fact, it's not impossible, and we can make that happen. That vaccine was developed, although originally discovered by scientists in Europe, in fact, not very far from here in Wavre. It was developed by scientists in Africa. So the clinical program was run and managed by scientists across Africa. Interestingly enough, a collaboration between GSK, WHO, USAID, CDC, and the VA in America. So a truly global approach, and we're on the verge within 2 or 3 years of having a vaccine which is effective against malaria and which could save 400,000 child deaths a year. Just one vaccine. Right? So that has been developed in tremendous collaboration with scientists in Africa. The second area, which I think is a very exciting new area, is it's very clear there are some very, very, of course, brilliant scientists in Africa. But they often don't have any resources and they don't have any laboratory capacity to really allow them to compete and to contribute in the way that they wish they could. So one of the things we've done at GSK is we've made available one of our most modern research environments. It's in Madrid, in Tres Cantos in Madrid. It's a research facility. It specializes in developing world disease. That's all it specializes in, nothing else. It doesn't work on Western disease. It only works on diseases of the South, if I can call it that. And what we've done there is we've made that facility available to any researcher from outside of GSK who wants to come and work in an industrial capacity. So you can be a researcher in Africa. If you have an idea, your research, you can come and execute your research in our facility. You can work alongside industrial researchers using industrial scale equipment, and we'll make that available. We don't pre-approve your research. You can do what you want in there. We recognize that, of course, people would love to do that, but they have no money to get there. So we created a funding, granting mechanism so that we will fund the costs of those scientists coming to Spain to come and work alongside our folks and allow them to pursue their efforts. That's the kind of initiative that you have to see to really bring a voice to the research scientists in Africa. Otherwise we're just going to keep saying the right thing, and there will always be a reason why it won't work. It's a bit like, why aren't drugs available in the poorest parts of Africa? You give them away, you get them to Africa, there's always a problem. There's a lack of distribution, there's a lack of an incentive for somebody to actually treat people properly. You know, all of the stuff we just saw on the video there, I mean, it's people behaving in a way they think is rational. Now, you're absolutely right, you know, Mark, it's an enormously negative healthcare burden being created, but you have to really unpick why are all of those people behaving the way they're behaving and start to tackle it. It's exactly how we've tried to address some of these issues in the way I've described.
Right.
I'm very glad that we have Margaret with us. Men have always answers to every question. But Margaret, she delivered us today a roadmap. But let's talk about the future of innovation in European Union before we come to an end. Margaret, she delivered us a roadmap where we have to go. Innovation, discovery, delivery. My question to Mark, what can European researchers deliver to those challenges that we are facing?
Well, I think they've got amazing resources, but my own personal view is that one of the biggest lessons that we all learn in getting to a successful conclusion is that we really have to understand the problem very well before we start working on the solutions. And it's something which I feel very passionate about, is that research for research's sake, or research that isn't delivered into the field and scaled into the field, is is a solution that hasn't really understood the full picture. And I think that what's really important is to look at the whole problem on a very holistic level and look at every single layer of delivery. For example, my project of, here I am, I'm a beach bum living in the Caribbean, I read a newspaper article, it's about syringes, I go, I can do that. Realise I can't. Realise I have to go back to the drawing board and learn everything about where plastic comes from, how they're moulded, how they're packaged, how they're sterilised, all the way through the whole understanding of that subject. And only then can I come up with the simplest of solutions. But then it's only the beginning, because now I've got to understand exactly what Andrew just pointed out, that, you know, we have lots of different situations that in every country are massive challenges. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could say, oh, WHO should buy more syringes, or Glaxo should brand the syringe and get some PR value out of it? But it doesn't work like that. First of all, we don't have the capacity to make every syringe safe overnight. We would have to build in massive incentives all the way up the chain to allow the big funding organizations to say, you can only have our funding if you're going to deliver the medicines and the equipment that we're giving you safely. And same with Glaxo. I can only come to Glaxo and build them in as part of a holistic approach. So I think if there's any lesson from my end that I can chip into the pot, it's that it isn't purely innovation. It's actually what you do with it afterwards, and whether you've got the wherewithal and the experience to scale it and deliver it.
We have to speak about the European innovation model. Just last week, the European Commissioner for Research and Innovation, Maura Geoghegan-Quinn, introduced her proposal for the next framework budget, the so-called Horizon 2020. And her proposal is 80 billion in the 7 years decade, starting in 2014 until 2020. And one of the cornerstone of this Horizon 2020 framework program for research will be the great challenges of societies, and 2/3 of about roughly 40 billion euros will be dedicated in the 7 years period to medicine and health research. Before we come to an end, I just read an article about a new initiative in the US. Okay, don't always look to the US, be proud of the European Union, but they came up with a so-called open innovation model. Big companies address, first of all, before they deliver products or services to the market, they get in contact with the consumers, asking consumers, what are you interested in, and what are your hopes and your wish, what industry should deliver. And that's the reason why I want to ask the audience now to come up with a few questions, perhaps. What are your expectations that GlaxoSmithKline and Mark should foster, and what WHO can contribute to improve the global health issues? Would you please introduce yourself? And so let's pick up 3 questions. And please tell us to whom
yes.
you want to address.
Is it on? Yes. Thank you very much. I'm David Hammerstein. I'm speaking for the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue, which is a forum of consumer and citizens organizations, millions of citizens in Europe and in the United States. We're very concerned that the innovation model presently existing is not giving return on taxpayer money given by European and US citizens, and is not giving return on a global scale. We are encouraged by some companies, and especially by the WHO, that has proposed a new innovation model. I would like the speakers to comment on the proposals by the expert working group of the World Health Organization on a new model of research and development for drugs, and they've published, which include innovation, inducement prizes, patent pools, different forms of licensing, equitable licensing, which means basically that public research investment should have special conditions for socially responsible use. That means affordability, accessibility. There should be strings attached to the investment, that billions that we're investing as European taxpayers, because this is not only a world problem of developing countries. Inside Europe, in Romania, even in my country, Spain, in Greece, in Bulgaria. There are many, many hospitals that cannot afford these state-of-the-art cancer drugs and other drugs. We need a new model of innovation, and we also need a more responsible way of using public funds. I just saw today, and I will end here, the Financial Times, a very large pharmaceutical company has decided to open up its research and share 20 drug developments with academics and scientists. I think the open development, the access to clinical trials for the no repetition of research is another important thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot. I know it's always a certain risk to give the microphone to the audience, because here in Brussels stakeholders world, you always get first of all statements. But nevertheless, I appreciate. But I want to give 2 more opportunities. Questions, please, go ahead. Who will be the next? Do you have questions to our audience, our panelists? Even if it starts with one
at the back.
a sentence of statement. Meanwhile, I want to thank as well that you contribute to us, that the handicapped people in the world can as well understand and follow our panel. Thanks a lot. So here we are. Do we have another? Yeah,
Yes,
please.
I have a
Can you
question.
identify yourself?
Okay, Nicolas André, BBB Project. I have a question. You speak about open innovation in healthcare. Do you have samples where open innovation were used successfully to solve healthcare problem elsewhere in the world?
To whom do you want to address the question?
Anybody, I don't know.
So, Andrew, did you get the question? Or?
Dr.
Yeah,
Margaret.
no, I think the question is there an example of open innovation helping to solve a problem? It depends what you mean by open innovation. I mean, I think the reality is that every single healthcare problem I can think of that's been solved was solved by more than one individual brain. And 99.9 times out of 100, it was solved by a combination of inputs, usually over a prolonged period of time from different environments. So academia, very rarely will you find significant healthcare breakthrough in any particular field to be achieved without some involvement of academia. It would be very, very unlikely that the company that began an initiative won the race. It's very rare that companies that are the original conceiver of the idea actually end up being the ones who get there first. Quite often, some other company will pick up halfway through, or they will learn something on the process. And so I think there are literally almost every example I can think of is an example. The malaria vaccine. The very, very first ideas for that came out of the US veterans research. They didn't get anywhere. But the very first ideas came from that. It was then picked up as really a project which wasn't going to progress by GSK researchers, but then it took somebody who came from an academic institution who joined GSK with a completely different view of how to think about the immune system that actually ultimately created the viable vaccine. That took 15 years, those 3 different events, and that only took us to 1989. And we've been at it ever since, and we won't have it finished until 2015. So I think the reality is that always happens in that combination of ways. What I think you're seeing today, particularly from our industry, is a huge commitment to be much more public. So GSK, as an example, publishes all of its clinical trials. Whether they fail or don't fail, whether we successfully prove our hypothesis or not, we publish all of that data so that anybody can see and learn from the mistakes we've made or the successes we've achieved. That's the kind of platform which will make what I've just described go quicker. That's what we're really looking for now, is how we can make that kind of natural spark happen much more quickly than perhaps it happened over the last 20 or 30 years. But the basic collaboration is really a fundamental part of the way in which the system has always worked and is absolutely essential.
And you said it, we have to go quicker. Thanks to the followers in the virtual world, thanks to the audience, thanks to the panelists. I don't want to summarize now, but I was looking for a Chinese proverb in the end, but perhaps you can tell us from your
Well,
Chinese...
certainly I would like to make one comment, but I cannot borrow anything from the Chinese proverb. But just to follow the comments from the participant representing the consumer aspect, I personally believe that innovation must have social benefits. At the end of the day, you know, whatever we do, it is improving, I mean, the human health. And you need to reduce human misery as an incentive and not greed. If greed is incentive, we are in big trouble. But I want to also end on one note. There's a lot of optimism and good thing about innovation, but there are also pitfalls about innovation. WHO this year urged countries to ban the use of a product. This is a blood test to make diagnosis of tuberculosis. And this is an unapproved innovation used in many countries. It wastes money, it costs, you know, the test was unreliable, false positive. What you do is people will take toxic medicines for no good reasons, false negative. Many people who should get the treatment did not get it and pass the disease on to other people. Why did we allow innovation of this nature to be used on such a wide scale? Because many countries do not have the regulatory and the implementation or enforcement capacity. And also because doctors. If doctors turn themselves into money-making machine, that is very sad.
Thank you. Women always do it best. My mother will become 90 next year, and is in excellent mental and health conditions. I will become hopefully 90 in 2044, but I hope see you soon. Thanks a lot.